All right, good afternoon everyone and welcome to this meeting of the Glenorchy Planning Authority for Wednesday 20th of April 2022. I'm Beck Thomas, Mayor of Glenorchy and Chairperson of this afternoon's meeting. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet on the land of the Palawa people and acknowledge and pay respect to the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional owners and ongoing custodians of this land on which we meet. The Glenorchy Planning Authority intends to act as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993. The Planning Authority has full power to make planning decisions on behalf of the Council. Joining me are my fellow Planning Authority members, Alderman Angela Ryan, Alderman Melissa Carlton, Alderman Gay Richardson, Alderman Jan Dunsby and Alderman Kelly Sims. We have apologies today from Alderman Stephen King. Before we begin, I'll explain our meeting procedures, as you can see on the screen. So first, the Planning Officer will present their assessment and recommendation and then answer any questions of Aldermen. Please note at this stage, a decision has not been made on the application. Secondly, the Chairperson, myself, will invite the applicant and any interested parties to have their say by addressing the meeting. Speakers are limited to 5 minutes each to address the meeting. Then the Chairperson and I will ask the Planning Officer to comment on any matters raised by the applicant or representatives. The Planning Authority will then discuss the application before going to the vote to decide on the application. Our Senior Statutory Planner will then explain appeal rights. When deciding an application, the Planning Authority is required by law to seek to further the sustainable development objectives of the Act, consider representations received during the public notification period, and make the decision by reference to the current planning scheme provisions. Our meeting rules are pretty simple. We simply ask that those present at the meeting, whether that be online or in person, please comply with any directions given by the Chairperson and, of course, respect other people's views and their right to have their say. We have a number of members of staff from our planning team joining us this evening in chambers and online, and we have a number of members of the public joining us both in chambers this evening and online via our live stream. So that's item 1, our Planning Authority declaration. We've completed item 2, apologies. Item 3 is pecuniary interests. Do any Planning Authority members have any interest to declare on any items on this afternoon's agenda?
No.
Well, I will declare an interest in item 5, proposed use and development of the electrolysis plant, cell house, manufacturing and processing at 300 Risdon Road, Lutana. So I ask that interest be noted for the minutes, and I will vacate the meeting for that item. Item 4 is confirmation of minutes. Do I have someone to move that the minutes of the Glenorchy Planning Authority meeting held on 21st of March 2022 be confirmed? Moved Alderman Ryan. Someone to second?
Alderman Dunsby.
Alderman Dunsby. Alderman Ryan.
No, nothing.
Nothing to comment? No. Any discussion of the minutes? No. And I'll go to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for. That is carried unanimously. Okay, as I need to depart the meeting for item 5, given my interest I've declared, I will call for a motion for a nomination for someone to chair this item.
I'm happy to nominate Alderman Dunsby. She's the longest GPA member here. So
okay. Thank you, Alderman Richardson. Nominating Alderman Dunsby. Do I have someone to second? Alderman Ryan. As it's a procedural motion, I will put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for. That is, I can't see your hand, Alderman Dunsby. Oh, bring it in towards your face a bit. Yep, carried unanimously. Thank you. I shall now depart the meeting and hand over to Alderman Dunsby and ask that you collect me, please, when the item is decided.
Thank you. So item 5 is proposed use and development electrolysis plant cell house, manufacturing and processing at 300 Risdon Road, Lutana, with the owner of the property being Near Star Hobart Proprietary Limited. I'll now call on our Planning Officer, Sylvia Jeffries, to do a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the site is outlined in blue, and the electrolysis plant is the location of it is where the red rectangle is. So the New Star site has an area over 100 hectares and is occupied by a zinc smelter, which occupies numerous large industrial buildings and associated infrastructure. The site is accessed from Durban Park Road and from Risdon Road, with the latter being the main entry. And the proposed building will be located east of the existing cell house and casting building. That's the building, the long building with the white roof. So within the area on the large lots, we mainly have large industrial development, and where you can see sort of the smaller blocks, that's residential development within the Lutana area. That's over 300 metres away from the proposed cell house. There's also green spaces in between the residential areas and the New Star site. Could we have the next slide, please? So this shows the zoning. So the zoning of the New Star site is general residential, and it's the same for some of the other large industrial properties. That's in purple. Then we have an area of green, that's open space zone land. That's also within New Star, but it includes a woodland and some other open space zone land, which provides a buffer between the residential zoned land that's in red to the south and the actual New Star site. Where we have the yellow rectangle, that's a transient TAS network substation, and that's quite close to where the proposed cell house is. The use is classed manufacturing and processing. That's a permitted use within the general industrial zone. Have next slide, please. So this shows the site plan. So the yellow area, that's going to be the new cell house. And then we've got some associated development, which are cooling towers and a pipe bridge. So the cooling towers are in blue and the pipe bridge is in pink. Next slide, please. So the application is discretionary because it's a level 2 activities. The discretion is under MCA. There's a small discretion in terms of the building height and the discretion in terms of car parking numbers. So in terms of the level 2 activity, the environmental impact assessment report was submitted, and the application was referred to the Environmental Protection Authority for a level 2 activity assessment. So the board has assessed that component of the application, and they made a decision to approve it subject to conditions. That is the environmental impact part that they have assessed of the application on the 5th of April. The council is required to attach the conditions of the board to any permit that the council would grant, and they are in new attachments, and it's quite a lot of pages that will need to be attached to the permit, and they are the environmental conditions that go with any permit. We have a next slide, please. So I'll get now to the discretion of the height. So the acceptable solution has states a 20-metre limit. So part of the cell house will be 22.3 metres high, and the cooling towers will be 20.5 metres in height, where the acceptable solution has a 20-metre height limit. So this shows the elevations. So the bit that goes over the 20 metres, essentially there's a sort of low-pitched gable roof where a part of it, you see that in the lower part of the slide, which goes over the 20 metres. And there is also a wing that's also higher than the 20 metres. So the height actually, could we have the next slide? That might show it a bit better, please. So this is an isometric view. So you can see where the development faces the existing higher buildings. That's where it is higher, and also in the middle of the roof where there's a pitched roof. And it starts at 11 metres where the adjoining building is lower, where it sort of faces Riston Road. And so the narrow side presents to the water, and the higher side sort of is adjacent to other buildings that sort of are of similar height. The performance criteria requires that we consider the bulk and the form of the building, separation from existing use on adjoining properties, and any buffers created by natural and other features. So in terms of the assessment, it's considered that the additional height would not substantially add to the bulk and form of the building, and that the bulk and form of the building would not be excessive. Also, it's considered that the building would sit amongst other large buildings and would present with the narrow side to the river, which would minimise any visual impacts. In terms of the separation from the nearest residential property, that's nearly 300 metres. That's quite a long way away from any residential property. And also for the third criterion, there is a buffer of open space zone land between the New Star site and the residential development, which also minimises visual impact. So it was considered that the proposal complies with the standards through the performance criteria. Have the next slide, please. Oh, this also, sorry, although finished with the criteria, shows where it would sit amongst the other buildings at New Star. So where the red rectangle is, that's where it would go. All right, could we have the next slide, please? So we did receive 2 representations. One of them was in support, especially in regards to the economic contribution that this new cell house would make and how it would prolong the life of the site at New Star. So that doesn't really require any comment because it is in support of the application. In terms of the visual impact, I've just talked about that in regards to the discretion. And in terms of the pollution, the EPA has assessed the component of the air pollution. It is noted that there be significant environmental improvements with this new cell house because it would employ the latest technology, and so pollution would actually be, air pollution would actually be reduced. But in any event, we don't really get to assess that part of the application because the EPA has assessed that. Now I just have actually remembered that I've forgotten to talk about a third discretion. There's also a car parking discretion as part of this. Because the new cell house has additional floor area, there will be 35 new car parking spaces required. However, eventually the old cell house will actually be demolished. However, that will be part of a separate application. So for this new cell house, there wouldn't be any new employees because that just would move from the old cell house and work in the new cell house. So in terms of demand generated, there wouldn't be any additional demand generated. So therefore, it was accepted that a parking variation for this reason will be acceptable with the new cell house. So then I guess we come to the end of the assessment. So overall, the application is recommended for approval. And again, I need to outline that there is a special condition that for the EPA conditions to be forming part of this permit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sylvia, for that comprehensive overview. Are there any panel members that have any questions of Sylvia at this point in time? No questions there. Do we have any representatives in council chambers this afternoon? Or the applicant? Could somebody let me know from the chambers, please?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I will now, if there's been no questions, I'll actually ask for somebody to move the recommendation in regards to this matter. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please? Sorry, so I can see moved and Alderman Ryan and seconded Alderman Sims. Thank you. Alderman Ryan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think, thank you, Sylvia, for that comprehensive overview. I'm satisfied that all the requirements have been met. The level 2 activity has been approved. The Environmental Protection Authority Board has approved the level 2 component of the application, subject to the conditions, but which will be attached to the permit. In fact, the board has said that the new cell house will result in a number of improved outcomes on the site, including mitigating groundwater contamination, reduced controlled wastes, improved air quality, lower acoustic impacts, and improved safety. So I think that's the first one taken care of. With regard to the building height, I think there's an extra 2 metres above what's required. Considering the size of the whole site and that it's been there for so long, I think that, as Sylvia said, an extra 2 metres would not result in a significant change in the impact of the building. And with regard to the parking, considering that the extra floor space is only temporary because the old cell house will be demolished, then I agree that the extra parking is not necessary at this time. So I'm satisfied that that the application meets all the requirements.
Thank you, Alderman Ryan. Do any other panel members wish to speak to this motion? Thank you. If there's nobody else who wishes to speak, you don't have any further comments, Alderman Ryan?
No, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour, please raise your hand, say aye. That's moved unanimously. Thank you very much. Sylvia or Vanessa, can you just go through the conditions now that this has been approved?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the application has been decided by the Planning Authority and the decision has been made to approve the application. So the applicant and the representatives will be notified of the decision and will have 14 days to appeal that decision if they choose to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now I'm just wondering if we can seek out the Mayor to return to the Chair.
Through you, Chair, I'll just withdraw from the meeting.
Okay, thank you for your participation, Alderman Richardson. We have a full contingent again. So we'll move on to item 6. Bear with me. Do my place in the agenda. Item 6, proposed use and development, demolition and 3 multiple dwellings at 26 Cleburne Street, Claremont. And our planning officer is Sylvia Jeffries, who joins us online. So over to you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Chair. So the site is located on the northern side of Cleburne Street. It's a rectangular property with an area of 1,045 square metres. So it's in a residential area. And can we have the next slide, please? So this shows it a bit closer up. So the existing site contains a single dwelling and several outbuildings towards the back. So the site adjoins a single dwelling on either side. The dwelling on the east is about 2 meters away from the boundary, and the dwelling on the west has got a carport, or actually a garage, on the boundary, but the actual dwelling is just over 3 meters away from the boundary. At the back, there's just a couple of sheds in the backyard, and the area generally is characterized by single dwellings. May I have the next slide, please? So the properties within the general residential zone, as are the adjoining properties. So the use is residential for multiple dwellings, which is a permitted use within the zone. Next slide, please. So this shows the layout. So it's 3 dwellings are proposed. The 2 at the front, that will be double story, and the one at the rear will be single story. There will be a driveway along on the eastern side. You can also see the outline of the existing dwellings sort of next to the proposed development. So the 2 higher ones, that will be sort of in line with the dwelling to the east, and where they have the backyard, there will be like a single story.
Sylvia, can I just stop you there? Sorry to interrupt. Our members of the public joining us in chambers can't see the screen, so I'm just asking you to pause. I'm wondering if we can manage to get the presentation on the side screens at all, or
Yes.
To take it off one of the centre ones to move it onto the side one, I think.
that would be okay.
No, we've got.
Yeah.
It won't do it.
Won't let us. If you would like to, would like to see the screen, you're welcome to come and sit at the table here. If you want to come and see the, or you can see it on there, okay?
I've got three seats here.
Yeah, so there's a big screen here. If you want to come and sit at the table here so that you can see. That's okay. You're welcome to come and join if you like. Okay, no worries. We'll just get it back up on our screen. Sorry. There we go. Sorry, Sylvia. On you go.
Okay, thank you. Yes, as I was saying, this is the site layout of the proposed development. There will be a driveway along on the eastern boundary, and there will be 3 dwellings. The last one at the back will be single story, and like I said, and the 2 at the front will be double story. You can also see the outline of the neighbouring dwellings on that layout, and so where the 2 higher dwellings will be, the double-storey ones, they will be sort of in the area where the neighbouring dwellings are. So where the backyard of the neighbouring dwellings are, there will be just a single-storey dwelling. It's proposed to carry out the proposal in 2 stages. So stage 1 involves the demolition of the outbuildings and construction of unit 1, which is the single story one at the back, and extension of the existing driveway. Then with stage 2, there will be demolition of the existing dwelling and the construction of the new driveway and crossover, and obviously unit 2 and unit 3 to be constructed. Yes, if we could have the next slide, please. So this shows a 3D perspective of the dwelling. So you can see the shorter one, that's the one at the back. And so those ones here that they facing the western boundary, the ones in the on the top picture. So you can see there's no windows on the side facing the western boundary. The bottom one is where the new driveway is and all the garages, and it shows this is adjacent to the eastern boundary. So the second story sort of steps in a bit, and that will be 5.7 meters away from the common boundary. So that's quite a long way. And like I said before, where the backyards are, there's actually just a single story unit. And again, you notice where it gets closest to the boundary, there's no window. Next slide, please. So the proposal is compliant with all of the acceptable solutions except for a garage setback. So for setbacks for building envelopes for all dwellings. So the first dwelling, actually, sorry, could we go one slide back again? So you can see in the bottom picture, that's what you see from the street. And there's a garage on the side there, and the garage is sort of further forward than the second story. Normally, a garage has to be 5.5 meters from the front boundary. This one, because the boundary is at an angle, it's between 5.09 meters and 5.8 meters away from the boundary. Normally, where there's a second story above that has got the same setback, then that wouldn't cause a discretion if the house had a 4.5 meter setback. But because the second story is further back, it doesn't set the building line. So this is actually causing a discretion. And but normally, so what the criteria is that the garage or carport for dwelling must have a setback from a primary frontage that is compatible with the setback of the existing garages and carports in the street, having regards to any topographical constraint. So it is considered that that sort of setback would be compatible with that criteria. It's also considered that the garage is not freestanding and not immediately recognizable as a garage, so that it would not dominate either the streetscape or the dwelling. And also there are other properties opposite along the street that do have garages and carports forward of that setback, which would be perhaps the main criteria when looking at the compatibility. So overall, it's considered that the proposal accords with the performance criteria because of that. Could we have a next slide, please? So I'm just going to show some site photos now so we can see where this development would sit. So the subject property has been boxed in red, or the existing dwelling that's there at the moment. And so you can see the single dwellings on either side where there's a little red brick row. So there's part of the council reserve is actually wider than the footpath, so that's where the front boundary is. Can we have the next slide, please? So here we can see the neighbouring dwellings on either side. So the first slide shows the property at 24 Cleburne Street. So you can see there's a driveway and a garage that's next to the subject property. Then on the other slide, that's the property to the east. You will note that that dwelling has got quite high windows along that common boundary, and that dwelling is about 2 meters away from the common boundary. Next slide, please. Then this just shows the area, the first picture just shows the area looking south down the street. There's a bit of a view of the Derwent there and of the surrounding Meehan range. Then the second slide shows the dwelling opposite on the other side of the street. And yeah, so the yes, we have the next slide, please. So the application was advertised in accordance with the statutory requirements, and there were 4 representations. So there were quite a number of issues raised. Some of them are planning issues and some of them are not. So we'll just go quickly through them. So in terms of the streetscape, representatives thought that the proposed development would not fit within the streetscape because there's mainly single dwellings in the area. Most of them are single story, which is correct. However, in terms of the streetscape, there's actually no particular planning standards. However, the streetscape is normally formed, I suppose, by the density. This proposal complies with the density. You can have 1 dwelling per 325 square meters if there's no other limitations on the land. Also, the streetscape is often shaped by setbacks and by the height. So normally within the general residential zone, you can go as high as 8.5 meters. The highest dwelling is unit 3, that's 6.3.1 meters. However, all of the dwellings actually comply with what we call the building envelope. The building envelope sets the standards in terms of how far they have to be away from the boundary in relation to the height, and also it sets the height limit of 8.1 meters. So all of those dwellings are within the building envelope. So it's considered that whilst it would be changed to what's in the area, it is within what's allowed within the planning scheme. And we're probably going to see more of that as people maximise the land, and perhaps there will be more units in the future. But the planning scheme, it tends for that kind of development. So it's considered that it complies with the streetscape, or that, you know, it's within the standards that trying to shape the streetscape. Then there was the issue raised of loss of privacy. So in terms of privacy, normally windows have to be a certain amount away from the boundary to preserve privacy, and decks as well, except this proposal doesn't have any deck. So normally, if there's a window facing a side boundary or rear boundary, they have to be 3 meters away from the boundary. Now, the only, like I said previously, the windows that facing the east elevation, they're actually 5.7 meters away from the boundary, which is quite a bit more than the 3 meters. And on the western side, there aren't any windows on the second story. So the privacy standard mainly applies to where the floor level is more than a meter above natural ground level and there's any windows there. So that in this case, that only applies to the second story windows. Then also, a representative thought there wasn't going to be enough private outdoor space. The proposal actually complies with the minimum requirements of private outdoor space, although it's only a small amount they have to have is 24 square meters with minimum width of 4 meters, and all units comply with that. Then loss of use was also raised. That's not actually a planning consideration, but again, in any event, the units are all within the building envelope. Even if it was a consideration, they comply with the building envelope. Then solar panels was also raised. I think one of the neighbouring properties was going to be installing some, and they thought there was going to be too much overshadowing for it. Again, the units will be within the building envelopes, but in any event, the solar panels are not actually there just yet. So we wouldn't be able to consider it until such time they were there, and only if there was a discretion in regards to the building envelope. Traffic increase, yes, there will be traffic increase, but it's within the acceptable limits. It's within the acceptable solution, so that complies. There's no discretion there. Obstruction of driveway and vehicular sidelines. Obstruction of driveway is actually road rules. It's governed by road rules and not by the planning scheme. And vehicular sidelines, it complies with that. There's plenty, even if the other unit is more forward, it complies well with that standard. Loss of on-street parking was another issue that was raised. The proposal provides for 7 car parking spaces, which complies. On-street parking, if there should be any on-street parking, belongs to everyone, and we're not really expect that there's going to be big loss of on-street parking, although it's not something that we can really consider under the planning scheme. especially if there's no shortage of parking. We could only consider it if there was a shortage of parking. Vehicular noise and light intrusion. Vehicular noise is not really a planning issue. Light intrusion is usually only a planning issue if it's on the same site. And this was raised by property opposite. Normally, if it was on the same site, it would have to have 2.5 meter separation, but we're talking about on the other side of the road, you know. Yeah, anyway, they're moving the driveway anyway, so it'd be probably closer to the property has actually got a carport there, so I think maybe the impact might be less, I don't know, but we can't consider it under the planning scheme. Just general noise. Noise is regulated under MCA. Should there be any noise, noise complaint could be made, but it's not an issue under the planning scheme. Loss of biodiversity. Apparently there was a garden there before that attracted quite a lot of birds and bees. Well, it's not the conservation area, and we can't consider it in this instance. Fencing. I think there were some concerns raised about the fence falling down in one area and needing to be repaired. Fencing is usually an issue between the neighbours, and it's governed under different legislation under the Boundary Fences Act, so it's a civil matter. Loss of property values, that is not the planning consideration. Somebody was worried that visiting dogs might not take kindly to strangers. Well, that's not the planning consideration. And somebody was worried about that tenants might be more transient population. That is not a the planning consideration either. So although some of the things are planning issues, they have actually been considered under the planning scheme and they meet the relevant standards. So the only discretion is in regards to that garage in terms of the planning scheme. Whilst the proposal may have different effects on the neighbours, like we're kind of restricted to the assessment under the planning scheme. And it's quite detailed within the report. You know, like each one of the representations has been addressed in quite a bit of details within the report. So overall, the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sylvia. Do any authority members have any questions for Sylvia at this stage? You do? Yes, Alderman Ryan.
Thanks, Sylvia. I wonder if we could go back to the slide of figure 4, subject property street view. Yeah, just, that's it, yes. Is it? Looks a bit different to the one I've got. I just wanted to get an idea of where the new buildings will come up to. So there's a big tree on the left there. Will that be there?
Yeah.
Will that stay there?
Yes, it'd be 4.5 meters in from the brick wall, or not quite 4.5 meters in from not brick wall, you know, the line of bricks.
So is the new building, does the new building come from behind that tree or does it extend past that tree?
The plan doesn't show where the tree is. Let me just bring up a map and see whether I can work it out. Yeah, well, it definitely come forward of the neighbouring house. Or well, when you go on the side plan, it will show that it'll be forward of the front wall of the neighbouring house. So it'll probably be forward of the tree, I'd say.
Okay.
So when you see the edge of the house at 24, and then the second story will be about roughly the same as that wall, slightly forward, the second story, and the bottom story will be further forward.
Okay.
And you can see on that layout where the line is of the front boundary and the bit where the nature strip is, sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify something as well, we're talking about a portion of the garage, not the whole garage, because it's at an angle to the boundary. And so we're talking about less than half a metre that extends outside the building envelope.
Yes, so I guess on here you can see those little squares on the side plan, like the roof of the porch, right?
Yep.
The garage goes along the same length, about same depth as that. You look at the curve of the road and the boundary runs parallel to that. You can see then that it doesn't run at the same angle as the front wall of the garage wall of the building.
Yep. Yep.
So that's how come in one area it's more than compliant.
Yep.
Like as more as you go to the, sorry, that map doesn't have north on top. Okay, that map's got west on top. So where you go towards the west, it's sort of compliant, but then when you go further to the east, it's not compliant. And I don't know, I think the writing might be a bit small for you, but the architects put all the different setbacks on and says what all the setbacks are up on the right-hand top side, left-hand top side.
Yes.
I don't know whether he can actually read that.
Yeah, I can read it on my.
That should show the bit that pokes out.
Yeah. So
Oh, no, actually, that's the front setback rather than the garage setback, but yes.
So there's just one bit that pokes out. So if that was 0.4 of a metre shorter, then it would comply, and this application wouldn't have been advertised.
No, it wouldn't have. If the top story was the same as the bottom one, then that wouldn't have been a discretion and it wouldn't have been advertised, no.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Ryan. Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to clarify, so just something resonated with when we're talking about the solar panels. So we didn't see any overshadowing here. So because it's fully within the building envelope, there doesn't have to be any diagrams for overshadowing at all?
Sylvia?
We do have shadow diagrams, but they're more actually for the private outdoor space. Yeah, because it's within the building envelope, even if there were shadows, we wouldn't be able to consider them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Alderman Sims.
Thank you, Mayor. Just through the Mayor, I just wanted to ask a question to clarify more for the public also. Just to ask perhaps Sylvia to speak to the streetscape compatibility and character. I understand it fits within what's prescribed in the Act and our own guidelines, but I'm just curious as to the interpretation. Is it what's already built on the street considered against that, or against what's prescribed in the Act?
It's what's within the planning scheme. In some of the signs, you do actually have objectives for local areas. Within the general residential sign, there's no such standard. But in terms of what the streetscape's going to be, it will be shaped by all the different planning scheme standards. So there's not a particular thing to look at, or we're not looking at the current streetscape, if you like, because there's no standard that refers to that. But because there's certain planning standards, the outcome of applying the standards will result in, I guess, certain way that the street's going to look like. It's just that, I suppose, no one in this, this planning scheme is is fairly new, but even prior to that, the density and the height were the same as what they are now. So it's going to take a while till we see on the ground a change in the streetscape that's being shaped by the current planning scheme. But there's no standard to consider the streetscape in this instance. There may be if there was a heritage building involved or something like that, but there isn't.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. It's ever evolving, and I think that's something that causes a lot of confusion within the community, just around that character and things staying the same. So that's really supportive and resourceful for aldermen to also take out with their cohorts. So thanks, Sylvia.
Thanks, Sylvia. Alderman Carlton.
Thank you, Mayor. So I understand the reason why this application is before us is because of the garage and the issues surrounding the setback. All of the other aspects have already been considered under the planning scheme and meet the planning scheme. So we are really just having a look at the garage today. But I did want to have a look at the diagram again where it shows the west wall, where there's no windows, overlooking number 24. So thank you. So that's been deemed to be meet the standards under the planning scheme. But I'm wondering what might happen in the future if the owners or whoever might be in that area might want to put windows in there. So what sort of protections, if we do approve this application, are there to ensure that that remains the same and windows don't appear on that west wall?
Yes, that would cause a discretion, which then would require discretionary planning permit, which then it will go through the same process again, where we'll be looking at the discretion and neighbours who get sent a letter and they could object to it. So normally, I guess if there was a new window, they would have to come in some sort of, even if the people didn't know they had to apply for a planning permit, if they put in like for building permit or a lesser documentation for building, then we will pick it up and we make them put in a planning permit application, and then again people will be able to object to that. So that would be a separate process, but they wouldn't be able just to do it without approval.
All right, so if someone did decide to put windows in, they would have to go through a separate process in order to get approval for that?
Yes, they would, yeah, because it would then trigger discretion.
Okay.
Because, but only, well, I guess on the one side there are already windows, but on the other side where there aren't any, that would cause a discretion because they wouldn't be 3 meters away from the boundary.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Carlton. Okay, thank you, Sylvia. We do have, I don't believe we have the applicant here, but we do have some representatives here. So, Mr. Strang, would you like to speak?
Yeah.
You have 5 minutes to address the authority.
Yeah, firstly, as I said earlier, my name's Tom Strang Senior, also got junior down there. The first point that strikes me that is very major is that when we are looking south from our lounge area, we're certainly not able to see that section of the building means that we can't actually see there. We can see, but it's further out on the road. So
Like when you're backing a trailer down the driveway.
like a trailer or something like that, you're not able to see that piece of building there. And that's probably the worst case of all. When we're coming down this driveway here, we're not able to actually see because that building will be there. Yeah.
So it's the sight lines that you're concerned about there, Mr. Strang. And I think Sylvia did talk about the development engineer's assessment of that. Sylvia, would you like to address that again?
Yes, I think if we're talking about the driveway, yes, the sidelines comply. It's within the engineering assessment that bit, but I understand they're way greater than what they need to be. So there shouldn't be any issues to be able to see when they're coming down the driveway, being able to see down the road, if that's what the issue is.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So Mr. Strang, what Sylvia's saying is that complies with the guidelines under the planning scheme. So it's not something we have discretion over as a planning authority, unfortunately. Was there anything further, Mr. Strang?
Yeah, we certainly won't be able to see down the road very far with that building there.
Yeah, okay.
And I mean, that building is clearly in the way of us. Like at the moment, we can see down the street. And we can, inside the lounge there, for example, we can see straight down the street all the way. And that's not a problem. But once we get the building in the front there, we're not able to see that.
We'll be able to see that because it's fairly forward. So where that tree is, it's forward of that. So we.
Yeah, it's forward of that pine tree there.
We come down, so if I reverse the trailer, which I do many times, it's got enough paper traffic because the school, they changed their entry exit at Austin's Ferry. So it's like the main thoroughfare now for us. So if I reverse the trailer out, I can't see. If I hit someone, you know, it's a major concern because that's fairly far past that where that tree is currently sitting. So, and our driveway goes like that. So it's,
Yeah, I understand your concern. What we're hearing from our planning officer and from our development engineer's report is that it's not something that we can consider as a planning authority, although it affects your amenity and capacity to use your driveway as you have been. It's not something we have discretion over. The planning scheme that has been set allows for properties to be built that far forward on the block of land that's there, so it's not something we have discretion over. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Strang. Anything further from you?
yeah. So where the previous owner, so they removed a lot of soil out of our boundary, which is where our garage wall sits. And it's got about a 20-30 mil gap. It's pulling away from the wall. She's going to come down. It's only a matter of when. Because they've moved all the soil from down the side of our boundary, which I told the previous owner not to do. And now it's starting to tip over. Mum and Dad were away, so I've got to get the engineer out, have a look at it. Because it's a major problem and it's going to come down. It's just a matter of when.
That's on the neighbouring property.
No, that's our
On your
boundary.
property, right.
Because the neighbouring property removed all the backfill
The dirt on
that
the
was
sea side.
supporting our wall. So it's no longer there. So what the wall is, it's was straight, it's no longer straight. There's a crack right through. It supports the wall and it's tipping over. She will come over, it's only a matter of time when it comes over.
Okay.
So we've got to get an engineer out to have a look at it and then we're going to go, yeah, it's got to go further.
Right, okay.
Because eventually it'll come down. Like it's better, it's pulled out from the wall, it's about 30 mil. So she's in a better way. Eventually it will come down. I've got a photo if you want to see the photo.
Is that something you've raised with council previously, aside to this? No? So I guess I take advice from our,
Yeah, I didn't realise it was that bad until I had a really good look at it. And
sure. So take advice from our planning team as to whether that's potentially a compliance issue or whether it is a dispute that would need to be managed between the parties. Vanessa, are you able to
So
comment?
through you, Chair, it's a structural integrity issue which you have to go and see building surveyors about to get that sorted out, and then there's processes under the Building Act that will assist you to make sure that a shared boundary wall is dealt with appropriately.
See, when they start taking the machines in, that's when I think we're going to have a lot of problems with it.
Yeah. So unfortunately, it's not something that we consider under the planning application, but it can be considered at the time of when the building application comes through, when they're actually constructing the buildings, that then they'll have to look at all of those sorts of things. So the planning assessment looks at more about the siting of the buildings and the height and that sort of thing, whereas the building and plumbing process looks at the structural integrity and make sure that it stands up and it's not going to fall down, and the engineering in that regard. So that's kind of a separate process, but it will follow. It's more often than not a civil matter though between the two neighbours, so it's good to keep the lines of communication open so that you can deal with it as it arises.
And they've ignored us both. They've ignored us. We've asked for the new owners. I've left a message with the real estate lady, and no, they haven't even bothered coming,
Yeah,
talking to us.
okay, well, that's unfortunate and not good.
No.
But if you can come in to chambers another time and ask to speak to the building officers, they will be able to give you some advice because they deal with that type of thing regularly. And so they've probably got some helpful advice for you on how to work through and get a good outcome. But in terms of the planning assessment, it's not something that we can directly address right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know that, because I know enough concrete workers and builders and engineers, that it'll have to be underpinned. It's the only way to do it. And that, you know, that entails another cost and a quite expensive cost. And, you know, then it becomes who's going to pay.
Yes, thank you
So
for
if
this.
we're going legally, it's, you know, it's, but this has opened up a whole can of worms that needs to be fixed. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Strang. Any further comments, Sylvia, in response to those concerns?
No, thank you, Chair.
No. Any further questions from authority members? Okay, well, we have a recommendation before us for approval, noting this application we received 4 representations. We've heard from the representors this evening, and we have the 1 discretion that we could consider under the planning scheme. So we have a recommendation for approval subject to 12 conditions. Do I have someone to move this recommendation, please? Moved Alderman Ryan. Someone to second? Alderman Dunsby. Thank you, Alderman Ryan.
Thank you, Chair. After all that, I'm satisfied that the application accords with the performance criteria, and so I'm happy to support this application subject to the conditions.
Thank you, Alderman Ryan. Any further discussion of the item? No. I'll speak briefly just to say thank you for your coming this evening to our representatives here and making your case heard. We hear that this development will have an impact on your sightlines in particular that you referred to, and a number of other matters that you raised through your written representation as well. And we, as we've talked about tonight, the only discretion we have in relation to this application is in relation to the setbacks and building envelopes related to that garage. So we are really limited in how we can address your concerns. But as Vanessa has said, there are other avenues for you to take, and other areas of council may be able to assist you in relation to those areas. So I'm satisfied, as has been presented in the report and as Sylvia has presented this afternoon, that the discretionary criteria are met in relation to the 1 item we have discretion over in relation to this application. So as a planning authority, wearing our planning authority hat as statutory decision makers under the planning scheme, I'm satisfied that we approve this recommendation. I'll go back to the mover, Alderman Ryan.
No, thank you, Chair. Nothing further.
I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for. That is carried unanimously. Vanessa, would you like to explain the process from here, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the Planning Authority have approved the application. So the applicant and the representatives will be notified of the decision, and then once you receive that notice, you'll have 14 days to appeal that decision if you choose to. There's some instructions in the letter about how to do that if you'd like to take up that option. If an appeal is lodged, then the development can't commence until that appeal's been settled. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you to the Strang family for coming along.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the best. Moving on to item 7, proposed use and development for 1 lot plus balance subdivision on a heritage listed place at 2 Beresford Place, Moona. And our graduate planning officer will present to us this evening, Imogen. Over to you.
Thanks.
Okay, so the proposal is for a subdivision at 2 Beresford Place, creating one new lot, so resulting in a total of 2 lots. The front lot is to be known as Lot 1, is proposed to have a total site area of 3,906 square metres, and this lot will also contain the existing dwelling. The rear lot, to be known as Lot 2, is proposed to have a total site area of 1,886 square metres. So the application also proposes a right-of-way and services easement with an associated paved driveway along the northwestern boundary to provide Lot 2 with access to Beresford Place. The existing frontage to Beresford Place is to be slightly widened to a length of 6.25 metres and will provide access to both the existing dwelling and the right-of-way driveway. A new gate is proposed, which is a wide span modern galvanised cyclone style gate. This style of gate is deemed to be an appropriate design in order to maintain the historic significance of the site, which is mentioned and recommended as part of the Heritage Impact Assessment. Okay, so the subject site is to the east of Beresford Place and is at the end of the road as well. The site is relatively large for the area with a total of 5,000 with a total lot size of 5,792 square metres, and Main Road Moona is just under 400 metres to the east of the site. The surrounding area is predominantly residential and lot sizes are consistently around the 600 to 800 square metre mark. To the northwest of the site, there is a multiple unit development with 5 multiple dwellings, and to the northeast of the site are a number of similar multiple dwelling developments also along Beresford Place. Okay, so the site is zoned general residential, as are most of the sites around the area. It's pretty predominant in that area. Of the surrounding sites, though, 2 Beresford Place is significantly larger, and that's just a street view of the front as it is now. So the site is also has one code overlay, which is the local historic heritage code, and as part of this application, a heritage impact assessment was provided, which was put together by Graham Corney. So there are 2 discretions. The first one is from the general residential zone, so 8.6.1 lot design, it's performance criteria 2, and the application is relying on this performance criteria because neither of the new lots have frontages, or both of the new lots have frontages of less than 12 metres. Okay. The application in this case, though, is considered to comply with the performance criteria. Firstly, Lot 1 is provided with access to Beresford Place with a 6.25 metre wide frontage and access way, and Lot 2 can be accessed by a right-of-way easement and has a width of 6.5 metres at the point in which the Lot 2 boundary begins. So there are no major topography restraints, and the topography of the site does allow for access to both of the lots. The frontage width will allow access to service connections and vehicle access to both lots 1 and 2, and the right-of-way carriageway will ultimately provide access to lot 2 as well, and the services along there as well. So both lots will have adequate vehicle access, and the proposed right-of-way is adequately sized and provides a passing bay as well. Now, finally, having a single access way along the proposed right-of-way is compatible with other similar developments in the area as well. Now, the second performance criteria that it relies on is under the code, the local historic heritage code. And David can't join us tonight, our heritage officer, but I've just sort of read out a little bit of what he said. So he says that the lot does comply with the performance criteria. It's compatible with the existing patterns of urbanisation in the area. There are also a number of significant landmarks on the site that will be retained. Firstly, the Federation Heritage Building, which is to be contained in Lot 1, will remain. There is also a significant tree that is to be retained and also protected as prescribed by an arborist protection zone of 8.52 metre development, including the driveway, won't encroach on that TPZ. So yes, the proposal is deemed to comply with that performance criteria. Yeah, so there were 4 representations in total, discussing a number of things, as you can see. So one of the major concerns raised by a number of the representatives were concerns about the potential impacts of a future residential development which may occur on the newly created lot 2 to the rear. In this case, the application is just for the subdivision, and so any development that's proposed in the future can be assessed and will be assessed under a different planning application. Another concern raised was about the gated entrance, and as I discussed earlier, the gate was chosen specifically as a recommendation made under the Heritage Impact Assessment to retain the significance of the site. So the proposal as it stands isn't expected to majorly increase traffic, as it is just a subdivision. And at this stage, there are no new dwellings proposed in either of the lots. So access will be reassessed if there is a development proposed in the future, and it can be assessed then. Construction interruptions. So a number of the representatives have raised concerns about the impacts of construction, specifically how the construction phase may increase vehicle movements. There may be noise concerns, and the impacts that and the impacts that work vehicles or heavy duty vehicles might have on the existing road. Now, the only development proposed for this application is the right-of-way driveway. So, and that's to be constructed of pavement. And this is considered to be fairly modest. And the construction of the right-of-way driveway is expected to be completed promptly and will have minimal impacts on the surrounding neighbours as well. Vegetation removal. So one representative raised concerns over the vegetation removal that may occur due to the proposed development or the right-of-way driveway, sorry. There is one significant tree on the site, but as I discussed earlier, it is protected and there's no encroachment on the TPZ of that. So there won't be any impacts. There's also no other significant flora on the site, and therefore any vegetation removal cannot be assessed under this application. Access and traffic. Multiple representatives have raised concerns as to the impacts of traffic on Beresford Place, specifically the impacts that a potential future development may cause regarding traffic flow. Again, I've said this before, this application doesn't propose any new dwellings, so it can't really be assessed under this application. And the right-of-way that is created is not expected to increase traffic at this stage. And amenity impacts on neighbourhood recreation. So it's been mentioned by a representative that Beresford Place, given it's a dead-end road, is often utilised by children as a place to play and interact, and concerns have been raised that the proposal may impact on these activities. Given the application is assessed for the site specifically at 2 Beresford Place, such activities in the public space cannot really be assessed under this application either. And finally, interruption on services. So concerns have been raised as to how the development may interrupt the existing services to the neighbouring properties. The proposed additional services for the new lot have been assessed by our development engineers and are deemed to be compliant with the standards under those codes. And it is not expected that the service, there's not expected to be any sort of unreasonable impact while the new services are being put in place. So yeah, overall, it's recommended for approval, subject to conditions.
Thank you. So do any authority members have any questions for Imogen at this point? Any questions? We don't have the applicant here, but we do have a representative present. Would you like to address the authority? Come forward, please. Ms. O'Brien, just have a seat there. Yeah, yes. Thank you.
I apologise, I just want to read it because I'm not.
Yeah, that's fine, no problem.
I urge Glenorchy City Council to refuse this development application for subdivision of the block at 2 Beresford Place and construction of the private right-of-way to access the rear block from the end of Beresford Place. The plan has a major flaw for access available. The section of Beresford Place between Unit 2, number 1, Unit 1, number 1 and 4 Beresford Place is extremely narrow, and there are existing traffic and parking issues which would be exacerbated by increased traffic that development of the rear block at number 2 and possible changed usage of the heritage home would bring. The end of Beresford Place in front of the existing gate to number 2 is used frequently for turning cars as residents of numbers Unit 2, number 1 and number 4 reverse into their drives. A large number of cars, probably lost while trying to get to Lena Valley, also turn there, with considerable fiddly manoeuvring due to the tight space. Visitors and tradespeople use the on-street parking, leaving only a narrow space for passing. I am concerned that I could lose this parking amenity should increased traffic make things dangerous. The proposed heritage farm gate in the plan concerns me. If the idea is to have it kept closed, opening and shutting it could affect access into my property just a few metres away, and also at number 4. Should the gate continue to open downhill, this places cars stopped just clear of the opening gate, right in front of the only access to off-street parking at each address. With higher traffic from the proposed development during and after construction, this poses an unacceptable limitation of free access to and from the 2 properties. I suggest that the gate would need to be located further inside the property at number 2 and open uphill so stopped vehicles did not block access to Unit 2, number 1 and number 4 Beresford Place while drivers open and shut the gate. Traffic problems are worse on rubbish collection days. Without footpaths along the end part of Beresford Place, bins are on the road itself and are collected only from my side of the road as the trucks cannot turn and have to back out. There are already 10 bins on my road frontage, and these restrict passage of traffic and parking availability. The only frontage from 2 Beresford Place to Beresford Place is taken up with the gate, so any bins from future dwellings would have to go elsewhere, and my road frontage is limited. I believe that the access problems with this development proposal make approval of it a very bad idea.
Thank you so much, Ms. O'Brien. Any comments on anything Ms. O'Brien's raised there from you, Imogen, that you haven't already addressed?
Yeah, no new comments, but I would just say that all 3 things that she mentioned, the traffic, the concerns about the gate and the concerns about waste would again be assessed under a new application. So,
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the application for subdivision?
Yeah.
So any future application for
Would
construction
reassess all
of
3 again.
dwellings,
Yeah.
all 3 would need to be addressed by the applicant and assessed again, at which point you would have the opportunity to make representation again. Yeah.
Well, some of my objections were referred to the construction period. Is that valid?
The actual
For the-
subdivision.
Yeah, for the right-of-way driveway, which is the only sort of development for this specific application, and I spoke about that before. It's considered to be fairly minor, and it shouldn't have any major impacts.
It would increase the heavy traffic.
So that's not a traffic increase isn't a consideration as part of this subdivision application, is that right?
Would you like to speak to that?
Not a temporary one for construction as it's seen as transitionary.
Sure.
For a driveway of this size, it shouldn't take an extended period of time to construct.
Sure.
And any construction would have to take into account a traffic management plan when they're doing the work if doing work from the street. itself.
So whilst it's acknowledged that it may have impact in increased traffic and bigger vehicles, it's not something that we can consider in assessing the application for subdivision, because we don't have any discretion in relation to that under the planning scheme. Yeah. Thank you. Alderman Carlton.
Thank you. So in the process of constructing the driveway, so there would be a period of time where there would be disruption to the people living in that area. Prior to that construction, do they need to come and actually apply for those permits still? So that in terms of their hours of work and those sorts of things, or does this application provide that guidance as to what that disruption might look like during that period of time that they'll be building the driveway? Sorry, through you, Mayor.
Sure.
So they'll have to reapply for a road opening permit, which will address those issues. So yeah, for any work at the access, they have to apply for that.
And further questions, Mayor. When they apply for that type of permit, is that communicated to the neighbours, or how are the neighbours advised of that process, and do they are they part of that process as well in terms of managing that?
I don't believe so.
Thank you. Alderman Ryan.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a comment. I just wanted to say I kind of do agree with Representative with regard to the gate, although it's something that we can't consider with this application, but it might be something that you want to keep hold of in case of another development application down the track, because I think it could become problematic, and maybe your idea of putting the gate further up, it might be a good idea, because it's logically should open downhill.
Yeah, it's much easier to open a gate downhill.
Yeah.
But it
So
does create problems for access.
It could do. So maybe you want to just keep that idea.
Yes.
And maybe in the future you might maybe negotiate if there's a further development application down the track.
I mean, it's happening now, but it's just sporadic visits to the property at the moment.
Yeah.
Mowing and stuff, so it hasn't been a big problem. But with more traffic, more construction going on, it could be really annoying.
It could be.
Have you tried to liaise with the developer directly?
No, I haven't.
No, because sometimes having a conversation, and sometimes we manage to get the applicant here in the room, and we can have these conversations and come to an agreeable solution. So encourage you to try to connect with them directly to raise your concerns and see if they are open to the ideas that you consider, because often they do want to be good neighbours and try and appease the neighbouring properties. So it's worth trying to connect directly.
Oh, I'll try that.
Yeah, absolutely. Any further questions from authority members? No. Okay, well, we have a recommendation for approval that a permit be granted for the proposed use and development of 2 Beresford Place, subject to 20 conditions, I believe. Do I have someone to move the recommendation, please? Moved Alderman Ryan, seconded Alderman Dunsby. Alderman Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor. I think we've covered it. This application is just for subdivision and creation of the second lot and putting in the services. And while there may be some problems, that would be for another time if another further development application was put at a later date. But on the application as it is, I'm satisfied that it complies. So I'm happy to support, subject to the conditions.
Thank you, Alderman Ryan. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Sims.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I just wanted to thank Imogen for her detailed presentation and answering a lot of questions throughout. Certainly assists at the end when clarifying and summing up and justifying. And it looks like the discretions are just around the lot design and the heritage overlay factors. which have all been mitigated and addressed. And obviously we can only assess at the stage that's been applied for. So I'm happy to vote for this development.
Thank you, Alderman Sims. There's no further discussion, then I'll go back to the mover, Alderman Ryan.
Nothing further, Chair.
Thank you. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for. That's carried unanimously. And would you like to explain the process from here, please, Vanessa?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the Planning Authority have approved the application and a permit will be issued, and the applicant and the representatives will be notified of the decision, and you have 14 days to appeal that decision if you choose to.
Thank you. Thank you for coming along, Ms. O'Brien.
Thank you. Very interesting.
So that concludes our GPA meeting for the 20th of April 2022. Thank you to those of you who have joined us online via our live stream, and our council meeting, full council meeting for the month of April will be held next Tuesday, 26th of April. So tune in at 6 p.m. or register to come along in person if you would like to attend. We hope to see you then. Stay safe, take care, be kind, and we'll see you next time.